Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be here with you. We're going to be in the book of Hebrews, chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. 1 through 10, and that is on page 1191 in the church Bible right in front of you. And so grateful to be here with you. As we start today, one of the things I wanted to get to help us understand this book, and I've been going back and forth. I've spent a lot of time studying this book. And if you're in it every day and you kind of work through, oh, this is what it means and this is what it means, then it's easier to stay focused on this whole concept that's emerging. If you're not in it every day, it could be a little bit more difficult. It's harder to make sense of it because what ends up happening is week to week, we say things like, the book is about finding hope and certainty in the superiority of Jesus. Now, as a statement, I say that. Most of us say, yeah, I agree with that. But the challenge is to wrestle with where the people that are hearing it for the first time are. That's the hard part. Because we kind of move on from that, right? We're not living in 65 AD in the Roman Empire where Caesar is demanding that you worship him as God, and Nero Caesar is the current one in office, right? That's not our current reality. We have the ability in our country, wherever you stand with our current government, we have the ability to speak our minds still. And in the case of early Christian history in Rome, they were executed if they didn't claim or hold to the claim that Caesar was God. Specifically, in this time period that we believe is written, is under the emperorship of Nero. And during this time, there was a great fire in Rome. Have you ever heard of the Great Fire in Rome? If you're not a historian, maybe if you're not into history, you may not have heard about this, but this fire in Rome really just hurt Rome a lot. And so Emperor Nero targeted Christians and used them as the scapegoat. He said it's their fault. And so he started to execute them so that they might, so the attention would be off of him. He was putting it on them. Like, these guys are the bad guys. And so there was this very public time of execution of Christians on crosses, on stakes, in the Roman auditorium, the Colosseum. They were just being executed. And so if you were a Christian living at that time, the temptation was, I don't want to be a Christian anymore because I'm going to get killed. I will literally get killed. So I'm going to leave Christianity and I'm going to go back over to Judaism because at least I was safe in Judaism. The point of the whole book of Hebrews is to say, no, you're not safe in Judaism. Your eternal soul will not be safe in Judaism because you're denying the Son of God. Judaism denies that Jesus is the Messiah. That denies that Jesus is the Son of God. So if you deny Christ too, you will be separated from God. So that's the warnings that come out in Hebrews. That's the underlying tension that's in the book. And so we've been going through it, right? We've been Hebrews chapter 1, Hebrews chapter 2, Jesus is the best. Hebrews chapter 3, Jesus is the best. And why? Hebrews chapter 4, Hebrews chapter 5. And now we're in Hebrews chapter 7. And in Hebrews chapter 7, it says, and let me tell you about this guy named Melchizedek. And if you're, for us, we might go, what are you talking about? Who's this? Who's this character? Where did he come from? And what is he all about? And so to really understand what we're going to go through today, you have to root yourself in Genesis chapter 14. So first, you have to understand the context. The context was the Hebrew Christian converts who were willing to leave Christ and go back to Judaism. That's context number one. Context number two now is the story of Melchizedek and Abram before he becomes Abraham. And that happens in Genesis chapter 14. And I'm going to summarize the story, but if you want to follow along, you can go to page 11 in the church Bible that's right in front of you there under the seats. It's an amazing story. I like when speakers are talking to follow and trace the story because I think it holds the speaker accountable. I also like to personally get familiar with the Bible, and this is one of the ways that you can do it. You look at the Bible, and then you can hear me talk about it, and if I'm wrong, we can compare notes at the end, okay? But here's generally how the story goes. Abram is living this quiet life. He's been called out of a place called Ur. Uniquely, Ur is probably near or around modern-day Iraq or Iran, in that region, Ur. So he leaves that. God calls him out of that land, and he comes all the way across by foot, by horse, by donkey, by camel, who knows? But they're traveling across the Middle East, and they end up in this region on the western side of the Middle Eastern area. And he's living this quiet life, and news reaches him that his nephew Lot had been swept up in a war. There was a coalition of eastern kings that raided the cities of the Jordan Valley, and they plundered Sodom, and they plundered Gomorrah. Now, Lot, Abram's nephew, was living near Sodom and Gomorrah. So his nephew gets kind of caught into this raid, and he gets taken with the people, and all of the stuff gets stolen from the cities. Okay, so they're all these eastern kings take all the stuff, and Lot is among them. Abram doesn't hesitate. He gets his people together. He goes out and forms an alliance with local partners. Then he pursues the invaders. He tracks them down. And under the cover of night, he strikes. And he's victorious. He wins. Lot is recovered. The captives are freed. The stolen goods are then distributed and reclaimed. Everybody gets a big chunk of the spoils of war. Okay? So Abram has his big chunk. So-and-so's got their big chunk. Abram returns home, not as a conquering king, because that's not what he went to do. He returns home as a person who saves people. So he saved Lot, brings them back. On the way back, he meets two very different figures. One is the king of Sodom, representing the glitter of the city, the logic of the people, the bargaining. And the king of Sodom wants his people returned, and he's willing to negotiate the spoil. So he wants some of the tribute. He wants to claim some of the victory. He wants his name on the win, right? He's like, our team won, right? Right? Our team. The king of Sodom. That's one person. Second person he meets is a king named Melchizedek. His name is Melchizedek, and he's the king of Salem, and he's also the priest of God Most High, is what Genesis 14 says. He comes out of his tent carrying bread and wine. You need to remember that because later, as we take communion, I'm going to reference that. I think it's really, really unique that today we're doing communion and our study lands on a day that we get to take bread and juice as symbolic of the body and blood of Jesus. And here we are, we're at the very beginning of the story in the book of Genesis chapter 14. You have this Melchizedek king who has bread and wine. It's just very interesting. He doesn't offer Abram a deal. He offers a blessing. He lifts his voice over Abram. He speaks God's favor. And he blesses the man. And he asks God to deliver him from his enemies. In other words, Melchizedek interprets the whole story theologically. He's essentially saying to Abram, you didn't do that. God did that. You didn't win. God won. And so we need to honor God right now because God delivered you. God protected you. Everything goes back to God. So Melchizedek is kind of teaching Abram that everything you have, everything you've been given, all of your victories, it all comes from who? God. And so we see in this Melchizedek character, very interesting thing that's going on. It was God's rescue. So Abram responds with an act of worship. He asks the Melchizedek king for a blessing, but he also just innately gives Melchizedek a tenth of all that he collected, all of the spoils, all of the stuff. He gives Melchizedek a tenth. And they called it a tithe. And in doing so, he recognizes God's hand behind the victory. Finally, Abram turns back to the king of Sodom, and he refuses to trade with them because he doesn't want the pagan king to claim credit for the victory of God. And so that is the account in short form of Genesis 14. And it's the moment that Hebrews chapter 7, verses 1 through 10 leans on. And it quietly signals that God's priesthood is bigger than Israel's known priesthood at the time, okay? And that's important. You know why? Because the Hebrew Christians in Rome are willing to deny Christ and go back to the Jewish religious system. So this chapter is meant to say, hey, you know the priesthood that you trust? No, there was another one before that priesthood. There's a Melchizedek king. He's a high priest of God, and there's something bigger that you're not paying attention to. And that something even points to something bigger. And that's where we get to on page 1191 in verses 1 and 2. I'm gonna take this apart a couple of verses at a time, and we're just gonna do 10 today. And some of them will be short, some of them will be not as short. But I'll keep it brief. Ready? Here we go. Verse 1, it says, "For this Melchizedek king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and he blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth part of everything. He is first by translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace." So when we get to this whole part about Melchizedek, the temptation is going to be that we want to know, where does he come from? Where does he come from? Where is he? This mysterious king of Salem. And there are some mysteries around this one, and I absolutely love it, and I'm here for it. When I get into this kind of stuff, I just absolutely love it, because there's parts of the Bible that just challenge us a little bit to go and discover more. There's something more. If we're not connecting all the pieces, we're gonna miss it. So what's happening here? What's the secret to the story? Where's Melchizedek from? I want to know, you know. And however, that's not what the book's trying to do. So I will give you something today, but we need to keep our focus on this main point, and that is Melchizedek was a priest king marked by righteousness and peace. The point is that we catch that this Melchizedek king is able to hold the tension of both priest and king. That is a political leader and a spiritual leader, two different roles. I made a reference of this earlier, but it is interesting, you know, with this a conflict that's occurring in Iran right now. Yesterday they announced that the Ayatollah has died after reigning for 30 some odd years. This Ayatollah has died. He was called a supreme leader. He was the spiritual leader of the entire country, okay? But not the president. The president operated the governing forces. He was in charge of the other things. So these are two distinct roles. And they're distinct on purpose, because I think what we tend to deal with, what we see is power, especially in government, desires to have total power over its people. And so they want both the spiritual influence over you and the governmental political influence over you. However, no government has been able to show that it can handle both power and peace together in conjunction with humility, with love, with mercy, with compassion, with justice and truth. So all of those things together, you see, is what Melchizedek represents. The word Melchizedek literally means king of righteousness. That's what the verse says. And then Salem means peace. So he's the king of righteousness and peace. And that's what this verse means to tell you. So what I'm going to do today is give you a point to learn and a thing to practice. Something to practice about this point. The way it flows out of us is to remember this. Our hope needs to be in Jesus as the priest king, no one else. There's no other supreme leader you should trust. There's no other king you should trust. Christians, and the call to Christians in Hebrews is to trust the priest king. His name is Jesus. And that's the reference. That's why it goes to Melchizedek, to remind you to put your trust in the priest king. His name is Jesus. And the best thing I can do for you as a pastor is lead you to the best of my ability, not to put your trust in me, not to put your trust in Orchard Church, but to put your trust in Jesus. You need to know him. You need to rely on the Holy Spirit in you to connect you to the heavenly King. His name is Jesus. And the Bible tells us that he's in the eternal temple behind the curtain, meaning he's in the holies of holies. And because we have Holy Spirit, God's Spirit in us as believers, we are connected in some crazy way to God in heaven now. And so when you hear the words, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and you hear things like Jesus say, the kingdom of heaven is near, what I think it means is that you can be fundamentally connected to God, and it happens in these moments of total surrender, and it's really hard to hang on to. You ever been there? Where you fully trust in God, you fully trust in you're finding yourself like repentant, you find yourself humble, you find yourself full of love and forgiveness, and you just have this sense it's all going to be okay, even though who knows what the world looks like. That's when you know you're in this mindset where you're aligned with the King of Heaven and you're connected to him. We have that ability, and it's like a muscle you have to train. The more that you can trust that, the more that you can go there, the more you can hang on to it. But it's kind of like holding a hot coal. You can do it for a little while, but you let it go. And we fall back into the flesh. Okay? There you go. Hold on to your hope in Jesus as priest king. It takes us to this next verse, verse 3, standalone. It says this. He is without father. Now, this is a reference to Melchizedek. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues as a priest forever. So as a person that's in Judaism, as a Hebrew person that's wanting to walk away from Christ, they would know who Melchizedek was. And so the reference to Melchizedek is interesting because he says he's a priest king. Then he says we don't know where he's come from, which means to tell us something of the eternal nature of the highest priestly office. The priest king office is eternal. But it also says something else, that there's a but there. It says, but resembling. So he's all these things, but he is not the one. In fact, he resembles the one to come. That's the idea. So you guys, like Melchizedek, you guys trust the Levitical priesthood. But there's another one. And Melchizedek resembles that one. That's what it means to say. Very technical. The book of Hebrews is very technical in that way. So you kind of have to walk through it and take things apart little by little. The Son of God, he continues a priest forever. So some things to know. We don't know where Melchizedek comes from. We don't know for sure who his parents are. He just shows up on the scene. We don't know his lineage. The Bible doesn't make that really clear. We do know that he's called a priest of God Most High in Genesis chapter 14, which is very, very peculiar because there were no priests at that time. Now, some ancient texts, here's the I don't want to get in trouble, so don't be quoting me all over the streets of Escondido on this. Don't be posting this online, but you should know. Some ancient texts Aramaic translations of the Bible identify Melchizedek as Shem, the son of Noah. So some ancient texts will take it back there. Some ancient texts will take it back there. And there's rabbinic support for this. And it's possible because the timeline could work out. So some people have done some work on, wait, is this Shem? Could it be Shem? It does make some sense because Shem would have, if Shem is Melchizedek, it would make sense that he learned how to worship God the Most High and how to worship him from his father Noah. That tracks. Right? Can I just tell you, that's not the point of this book, though. It is a mystery that we want to solve. We don't know is the ultimate answer, and there's a lot that we don't know. However, it does track. There's some uniquenesses that track that maybe there was a king. And that's really important because what we're going to get to at some point in this sermon is there something really unique about Melchizedek and how he worships God and how Abram is able to say, oh, we're worshiping the same God. Because that's never explained. We don't see in the text anywhere where Melchizedek goes, hey, do you worship Yahweh God? Because I worship Yahweh God. There's no conversation like that. He just shows up and says, I'm going to bless you now. And Abram's like, yes, please. And here's 1/10 of everything I have. So it's a so there's something happening, like his spirit is resonating with Melchizedek's spirit. And they're together worshiping the same God in some way that's tracking. Melchizedek comes from out of nowhere. And the point I would have you to learn here is that Melchizedek is presented as an enduring priest, an eternal priest. And he points to the Son who will be the ultimate eternal priest. So it's really, really cool. So that's why it says it comes out of nowhere. He's got no genealogy, and yet he points to the one that will be forever. There's something that Abram, was connected to. Abram knew innately that Melchizedek was a priest of the same God that called him out of Ur. Like Abram came from way out of somewhere else. And then the two meet and they're like, oh, we worship the same God. King of Sodom's like, hey, can I talk? And they're like, no, you don't get to talk to us. And they're going to have a moment. But there's some miraculous connection there where they can be aligned. And we can't explain that other than it happened. It did happen. And he's called a priest of God the Most High before there were priests. In fact, 430 years before any priest would be in Levitical tradition. Pretty amazing. The point that I would take from this and to give you would be to put your trust in the forever priest. That's what it's meant to do. The passage is meant to anchor the Hebrew converts to Christianity in their faith. Put your faith in the forever priest. His name is Jesus. You can talk to him. You can confess to him. He's praying. He prays for you. He takes your request to God the Father. You are connected to him supernaturally. It's amazing. And it's a great time to ask yourself, what do you really trust? Another thing you might say is, what do I count on? What am I counting on in life? If you've been here at any time, you hear me talk about Escondido, and I complain a lot about the traffic, and I complain a lot about, dumb stuff like electricity. And one of the things I like to complain about is how many flat tires I've gotten driving around these roads. Has that happened to you? I get flat tires. I don't know how, if it's how I'm driving or whatever. But the point is, when I get a flat tire, I tend to say, oh, how much is that going to cost me? And then I worry and I think about how much, do I have enough money to pay for the flat tire? And what that reminds me of is I'm still needing to grow and remember that all provision comes from God, not my bank account. It's not that I won't pull from that bank account. It's just that my first thought goes to, can I afford to fix this myself? And God wants to be in a relationship with us where we're counting on him. God, can you help me? Will you help me? God, how are we going to get through this? How are you going to take me through this? And to have that full reliance. Okay, this takes us then to verses 4 and 5. And that says, see how great this man was to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these are also descended from Abraham. So according to Jewish law, the people gave tithes to the Levites. These are the Levitical priests who used the tithe to build and operate the temple. In this case, the Levites have not been established yet. They have not been established yet. They won't have been established for another 430 years. That is just crazy. You ever think where you're going to be 100 years from now? And obviously not here, but you ever think like, what's the world going to look like in 100 years? It's a crazy thought to have. Imagine 430 years later is when the Levites are established. And if they're and so this is referencing Abraham gives Melchizedek a tithe before tithing was a law or was even instituted by God. Before any of that, Abraham just gives a tithe. And the author is not, he's not trying to fundraise from this group of persecuted Christians. So this is not intended to say, and you guys need to tithe too. It's not intended to say that. But it is intended to reveal that Abraham recognizes Melchizedek as greater than himself. So he's the great big guy. Abraham's smaller. So to people that are willing to leave Christianity and go back to Judaism, they're learning, no, actually, Melchizedek points to Jesus, and Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. So the point that I would give you to learn there is Abraham honors Melchizedek with tribute signaling recognized spiritual greatness. So Abraham is saying, I think Melchizedek is awesome. And the tithe here is evidence of worship and trust. And so I think a practical point we could take away from this is that tithing is an act of trust. And I think that's a very difficult concept for us because we struggle to trust God in this way in general. It's also difficult because churches have abused tithing and financial responsibility as long as there have been religious institutions. And I want you to know, I just want to take a moment to say this. At this church, one of the things that we're submitting ourselves to is an institution called the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. And that's because we want to change the trajectory of churches and trust in God and the institution as much as we possibly can. So what we've done as a church is submit ourselves to ultra scrutiny. We have, at this church, we're submitting ourselves to an institution that has bookkeepers, accountants, and CPAs and legal people. Constitution. They're inspecting our Constitution. They're reviewing almost every message I've preached in the last 2 years. They're doing investigations on our elders. They're doing deep background checks on all of us so that we can receive accreditation from them. And it's really important. There's over 30 churches in Escondido. Only one church has this accreditation. And I'm saying all this because I think that's really important. And I think money gets in the way of people trusting God. And I think churches get in the way of that too. And so I want you to know we're working our best on eliminating the distractions so that you can trust God more. Here's what I'll ask you to do. I would ask you to go to the Lord and ask him, God, how am I trusting you? It's a great moment in the text to force a conversation between you and God where you're just asking him an honest question. God, do I trust you to provide for me? Do I trust you to make a way for me? Am I withholding from you in any way? And make that a conversation between you and God. What's striking is that Melchizedek in this passage is not a Levitical priest in the law who should get a tithe, and yet he gets one because Abraham is so moved and connected to him, believing that they're worshiping the same God that he just gives. So this is a really amazing thing, which signals Melchizedek's rank. So he's the higher one, Abraham's the lower one, and that makes sense then in verses 6 and 8. It helps make 6 and 8 makes sense. It says, "But this man who does not have his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises." Just that alone was wild. "But this man Melchizedek, who does not have his descent from Abraham," because Abraham, God promised Abraham that he would have many, many children, multitude, right? And that the Savior would come from his line. Well, it says this man blessed him. That means, and a lot, I'll get to that. It says here in verse 7, it's beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. And it's supposed to take you back to kind of a priestly acknowledgement where you understand the priest would go before the people and he would receive the blessing from God, and then the priest would take the blessing and then give it to the people. So there's rank and file and hierarchy in the structure of blessing and relationship with God. And it says here in verse 8, "In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives." So you have to remember there's no Levitical priesthood, there's no temple system, there's no commandment requiring tithes, but Abraham gives a tenth to Melchizedek, and he does this as a way to show that he believed in Melchizedek was truly a priest of God the Most High. So he shows submission in receiving a blessing and giving an offering. And that's really important because Hebrews says that the direction reveals superiority. Abraham trusts Melchizedek, who trusts God. So there's a cascading effect there. The point that I would give you to learn is that Melchizedek blesses Abraham, and blessings flow from the superior to the inferior. That's just right in the text. Now, at this point in my study, as I'm studying all this, and I told you it's kind of hard to focus sometimes in these studies, I started trailing off because I'm thinking, like, haven't we covered this already? What's the point? Like, you told me about a tenth like 5 minutes ago. I already get that he's a priest. What is going on? Like, why are we repeating this over and over again? And here's the idea. You're supposed to get the picture of this is kind of like a commissioning service for a young officer. A young officer graduates, or a missionary in a church is sent out, and they might be gifted, trained, and ready, but the moment that changes everything is when someone recognizes authority and lays hands on them, prays for them, and officially sends them out. So that's kind of what's happening in this moment. The blessing is not just a compliment of Abraham. It's a public declaration saying, this man also worships the same God that I worship, and I'm going to give him a blessing that's going to encourage his faith to keep trusting the God that's out there in the wilderness leading him. It's pretty amazing. Okay, what do we do with this? Here's what I would tell you. Learn how to approach God. The idea of the inferior receiving from the superior, I think, is a good time and moment for us to remember it's very important that we learn to trust God, that we be humble before God, and that we don't think of God as our cosmic assistant or vending machine. And I think that's getting harder and harder with, is anybody using ChatGPT in here? It's a mixed bag, yeah. So AI, people like AI, people don't like AI. Anybody use Google? You use Google in here? Google's powered by Gemini, so you are using AI. Just so you know, if you're being careful, you should know that. Here's the problem. We get used to making demands of computers and the things in our life that support us. So we go, give me this, give me this, give me this, right? And what ends up happening is that forms an attitude in us. So when we go to God, we treat God like an assistant. God, can you get me this? God, can you get me that? God, can you fix this? God, can you fix them? Some of you are praying, God, get rid of that person. I know it. So there's all these prayers that we're talking to God on, but we're just kind of giving him these commands. And this text, I think, calls us to remember the superior blesses the inferior. So we got to remember our place before the God of the universe, really important. And in it, we learn how to trust God and worship him. And I think we can do that. I think repentance becomes normal then, and gratitude becomes natural, and we start saying thank you to God for more. One of the things that came out of my study for me personally was I went to go to pray after having studied this for a couple days, and I found myself thinking and saying to God, thank you for letting me talk to you, because you don't have to. That's a really interesting thing to consider. God doesn't have to listen to his people, but he does. Why does he? Because he wants you. He wants to love you and know you and help you and guide you and lead you. He wants to shape your soul for eternity so that you'll be able to walk with him. It's really powerful. So learn how to approach God. This takes us all the way to the end, verses 9 and 10. And that says, one might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham. For he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So this is a really, really strong statement. If you grew up as a Hebrew, you were a Jew following the Torah, and you understood the power and significance of priests, that idea makes sense. That Melchizedek was a priest of God the Most High, and that he had no genealogy, no recorded mother or father. He just shows up out of nowhere. But he had the authority to bless Abraham. Authority for blessing could not come from God Most High and to the priest, then to the recipient. It could only come from God to the priest, to the recipient. So that would make sense. And so if you were there listening to this, you might have an objection, right? You might say, but the Levites in the Jewish system, the Levites and the Pharisees, like they didn't submit to Melchizedek. They don't venerate Melchizedek. They don't make a big deal out of Melchizedek. They make a big deal out of Abraham. And so the author of Hebrews drops the hammer, and the point that I would give you here is that he says Levi, the priest that you respect, he's inside of Abraham and acknowledges Melchizedek's superiority. This is one of those I don't like to poke fun at people or anything, but sometimes I think it's funny to hear how simple have you ever heard a simple, funny country joke? So this kind of smacks at that for me a little bit. It's kind of like, if you think Levite was good, well, Levite was in your daddy's loins, and Abraham was blessing Melchizedek, receiving a blessing from Melchizedek. So you see this idea of superiority to inferiority, because the Jews traced, for the Jewish people, ancestry, lineage, and their seed. The seed of a man that transfers to a woman, right? The seed was very important. If you were of this seed, you were really good. If you were not of this seed, you were not. So they say, we're really good. We're chosen by God because we're of the seed of Abraham. So what the author is saying is, Levi is in Abraham, and he acknowledges Melchizedek's superiority. I'm going to invite our worship team up. If Abraham honored Melchizedek, and if Levi is still in Abraham, then Levi is placed beneath a greater priesthood. That means the Levitical system was never meant to be your final hope. That's the point of the author to the Hebrew people. Jesus is the true priest king. He's righteous, and he's able to give peace. Jesus is alive. And he can bless you with what you actually need. What you actually need is forgiveness, access to God, a clean conscience. So hold on to your faith. Put your trust in the living Christ. That's what this is all about, that you would keep your hope in Jesus. Many scholars believe, again, that the Hebrew converts to Christianity at this time were under incredible pressure from Nero and the persecution. Nero was killing, slaughtering Christians. And so the climate, the temptation for denying Christ, it was a very real climate. So they wanted to shrink back, to retreat to what felt safe and familiar. Hebrews is written to stop that drift. This whole thing on Melchizedek is written so that we would know Melchizedek resembled, he pointed to the son that would come. And that son is an eternal priest king that you can trust. Some of them wondered if following Jesus was worth the cost. And Hebrews answers with one big argument. Do not trade the living Christ for a safer religion. Don't trade Jesus for safety. Keep your hope in Jesus. Over and over, that's the message. So God's working before Levi. God's now given the final priest, Jesus, to us. Don't give up your hope in Jesus. Keep your hope in Jesus. And it's fitting today that we get to celebrate our hope in Jesus with the symbol of his body, which is the bread, and the symbol of his blood, which is the wine, which I think, interestingly enough, Melchizedek puts on display in Genesis 14. I just think it's the story of God unfolding over that much time is really, it encourages me. It encourages me. The consistency encourages me. And I can trust it. I can find certainty in it. The moment with Melchizedek and Abraham and bread and wine, that's not communion yet. It's a foreshadow to the priest king to come. His name is Jesus, and he provides us with grace and mercy. So as we come to the Lord's table now,